And there you go. It tells you there's a recording in progress, just in case you weren't clear from my instructions. So welcome to this presentation on supporting vaccinations holistically. What we're going to look at today is I'm going to cover a brief overview of the immune response. Now, I was actually going to look at the whole immune system, but when I started taking notes on it, I realised that I'd organised a 2-hour presentation and I thought that was a bit of overkill. So I'm just going to focus very briefly on white blood cells and their component in immune response, because that's really what's relevant to supporting you through the process of vaccination. Then I'm going to look at 5 factors that impact your immune system. So what can you do now to get your immune system in the best shape so that it can respond appropriately when you're having a vaccination and hopefully minimise side effects? And one of the things I'm going to focus on today is really making sure that you don't over-rev your immune system, because if your immune system is responding really aggressively, that's when you get what they talk about as a cytokine storm, and you'll get a lot more side effects. So what we want to do is have their immune system responding at an appropriate level, but not over responding, or in fact under responding. We want to get some response. And look, generally I think with these vaccines, some side effects, not excessive, but some side effects tells you that your immune system is actually having a response to it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. We just want to make sure it's not overwhelming. Then I'm going to look through the key nutrients for support from a nutritional perspective. And what I have organised to be emailed to you is an anti-inflammatory diet sheet about what's recommended in terms of dietary support. I'll talk a little bit about that as well, but I just wanted you to have a handout that went through that. And when I go through the nutrients, I am going to give you some dosing suggestions, but it is specific to your requirements. If you're deficient in something, you need to bring your levels up first. If your levels are fine, then I'm just going to suggest kind of a modest dose. Is that okay with everyone in terms of an outline? Okay. All right, so I found this picture, which was a very modified, as I said, I was looking at immune response initially, and I was going to cover the whole immune system. But when I realised how comprehensive it was and the fact that it was a 2-hour lecture, I didn't think anyone would be really that chuffed with having a 2-hour lecture on the immune system. So I just wanted to look at what happens with your immune system when it responds to an infection. So you can see from the picture, you've got a macrophage, but these are all basically white blood cells. So when you have a blood test done and you get a full blood count, they'll usually monitor what they call white blood cells, and then it will be broken down into subgroups. So this part of the test, the full blood count, is looking at the white blood cells. And the white blood cells consist of things called lymphocytes. So you'll usually see lymphocytes recorded on that blood test as well. And you want them in a certain range because you want to have enough of them so that there's a capacity to respond to an infection, or in fact, it could be a virus, it could be a pathogen, it could be a toxin, but you want to make sure that those levels are maintained. And when people's lymphocytes become very low, they usually get everything that's going and are unable to resolve an infection quickly. So this is why white cells are really important. Now, there's 2 types of lymphocytes that are important in terms of an immune reaction for us, and that's a T cell and a B cell. And the B cells basically are the ones that produce antibodies to virus, bacteria, and pathogens. But the T cells, and you can see on this slide, there's what's called a memory T cell. So the memory T cell is, once you've had an infection, basically we kind of store the data in this memory T cell that says, you've had a cold that looked like this. And the next time one of these macrophages comes around and mops up one of these cells, it goes, oh, I know what this is. And this is the response I need to generate. And off it goes and generates T cells that can deal with this infection. So you may find when you're, it's really common for kids to get lots of infections because their immune systems haven't seen these infections before. However, as you get older, your kids may get really sick, but you may only get mild symptoms because your body's already had this or something very similar and knows how to respond to it. Now, the problem with the current virus that's going around is that most of us haven't seen a coronavirus with a spike protein before, so we don't have that innate immunity where we know how to respond to it. So what we want to do is really support our B cells and our T cells to be effective. And for the T cells, we really need to make sure that we have sufficient of them. And I'm going to just go through now a few of the ways we can do that. So it's quite a complicated slide. I don't know that you really need to understand the entire process, but what you really need to focus on is how do we support our lymphocytes and our T cells to be effective? And that's really what I'm focusing on. So there's 5 factors that really impact your immune response. And basically what I'm looking at is things like, so a lot of the research has shown, for example, that being really overweight means that your immune response is muted. So there's more serious, this virus that's going around at the moment, there's more serious virus in people who are carrying a lot of excess weight. So, you know, if you're getting the vaccine in a couple of weeks, you probably can't get weight down quickly, but certainly getting to and maintaining a good weight for your age is really important in looking after your immunity. And again, that's probably a longer discussion, but, you know, the anti-inflammatory diet I'm looking at might be of assistance there in really maintaining a good weight range for you. And the other thing that's important, you know, it's not just about the food we eat, it's actually what's in the food, you know, in terms of the nutrients. So what you're absorbing in terms of your nutrients that support your immune system. So for example, one of the things I really pound the table on consistently is having 3 cups of vegetables a day. Doesn't sound like a lot. Well, for some people it sounds like a real lot, but for most people, in terms of getting that nutrient intake in and a range of minerals and vitamins, etc., those vegetables are really important. The other things that are critical is getting enough protein. And that's really important because a lot of your immune factors are actually made out of protein. So ideally for most people, protein, what I say is a really good rule of thumb. Look at your palm, and you want to be having, for say lunch and dinner, palm size, palm thickness piece of protein. Now that's an animal protein, so that's meat, fish or chicken. If you're having a vegetarian protein, it doesn't have as much protein for the physical content, so you need 2 palms. But ideally you're doing about that much to support you daily. Now, I'm going to go into some specific nutrients, but I really think if you could look at nutrient intake, what I really focus on is eating the rainbow. So you want your brightly coloured vegetables and fruits, as well as like your brassica, your cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, that sort of thing. And then I'm a big fan of 1 cup a day of leafy greens. And I don't know if you can see that I'm heating up a bit on the camera, because that's what happens when you put lights on yourself. But the 1 cup a day of leafy greens is also a bit cooling for the system. So it's also a good thing to include for those women who are over a certain age and prone to a bit of flushing. So, you know, think of that as being the way nature cools us down. Now, the other really important thing for maintaining good immune system, and I always think of this in terms of, if you look at, you've got a bucket of energy for your hormones, so, or for, you know, stress response, etc., etc. So if you're using up all your hormones in responding to stress, less is available for supporting your immune system and other systems. So maintaining blood sugar, etc., etc. So it's really important to look at what stress levels are like. And for some people, I know at the moment, I actually think being in lockdown is really stressful if you're an extrovert, because you can't go out and socialize with people and you're stuck with the same 3 people in your environment. Whereas for introverts, it's probably like, yay, I don't have to go out, I don't have to talk to anyone. Now, most people don't fall clearly into one bucket or the other, but you know, this being in lockdown can be a stress. So if you have a friend who's a real extrovert, try and have a Zoom cup of coffee with them at least every couple of days so they don't go completely bonkers through lockdown. Now, for you as an individual, I think it's really important to look at actually managing your stress levels. And, you know, there's a few ways you can do that. I think one of the most important things and one of the most underrated things is exercise. Getting out, having a walk in the sunshine, well, when it is sunny, but every single day. And look, if you're not someone who's done a lot of exercise historically, start with short walks and build up. You know, don't overdo it because that's stressful on the body too, but start with, you know, do a lap around the block. And then when you're feeling better, do 2 laps around the block and gradually build that up, because moving, and, you know, it's good for the hormones because it releases the happy hormones like the endorphins, but also it's anti-inflammatory. So it's going to deal with my next point, which is about inflammation. And I'm bounced around a bit here because stress and sleep to me are so linked. If you're not sleeping well, it's incredibly stressful. So for a lot of people, they don't get enough sleep. And there's quite a few things I would suggest in terms of getting adequate sleep. But what I want you to do is really work on these things for at least 2 weeks before you get vaccinated and 2 weeks after. And then once I've made you establish a pattern, you'll continue it anyway. So that's, you know, that's my goal achieved. But what I would say with sleep is probably some of the obstacles to getting good sleep is start with looking at your sleep hygiene. Are you going to bed early enough? So are you staying up till 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night because you're watching your favorite video on stream? Or is there some, you know, you answer a few work emails or something else that then gets the head going? So try and make sure that you have good sleep hygiene and you start to wind down around 10 o'clock and that you're in bed by, say, 10:30, ready to get a good night's sleep. The other thing is make sure that the sleep environment actually really facilitates good sleep. So, you know, if you're the sort of person who finds it trouble regulating your temperature, doonas might be a problem for you. You might be better with a couple of layers of blankets so that you can actually have the right level. Actually, they say the right temperature for sleeping is about 19 degrees. So it's cool enough that you can have a blanket on, but you don't want to be overly chilled or too hot because that then stops you sleeping as effectively. I'm not sure. I'm actually quite happy with it being colder and having more blankets, but that's where I sit individually. So I think it's about having an environment where you can sleep well. Now, I don't know if any of you have one of those husbands that doesn't sleep well and then keeps you awake, or a partner or something else. But I think if that's the case, you know, sometimes actually getting good sleep can mean sleeping in different rooms, if they're actually keeping you awake. I know I've had a few nights where I've gone out, I've got a very comfortable couch and I'll go out and sleep on there because it's then I can get 3 or 4 good hours where I'm not being disturbed. The other thing with sleep is this device. Fabulous device though it is, and really useful. I really recommend that people don't have these in the bedroom, and because the noise they make, constant notifications, whirring, etc., I think it's really disturbing to your sleep. So if you have problems waking up, I'll allow you to have it in the next room with the alarm on so that wakes you. And I'll tell you what, having the alarm going, you have to get up and go into the next room. That will usually help with sleep. Now, I've got a few more suggestions on sleep on my blog, which is Christine Pope Nutritionist. So I'll send some links through. But I think if sleep is a problem for you, aim for what you really want to do before this is you want to be getting at least 7 to 8 hours of good quality sleep a night. Now, that may mean you wake up once or twice, but that you go back to sleep. All right, so that's kind of the goal for the 2 weeks pre and post. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was inflammation. Generally, being inflamed means that you're less responsive to treatment. So whether it's the vaccination or something else. And sources of inflammation can be really broad, but can include things like chronic injuries that have not resolved. So if you've got, you know, if you've, like, let's look at a really, say you've broken your foot and you've been in a boot for a few weeks and it's not resolving. Well, you need to make sure that you're getting treatment and that you deal with it. There are also some really lovely herbal anti-inflammatories you can use, things like curcumin and fish oils, that can help bring down inflammation. And being really overweight, and I'm talking, you know, 15, 20 kilos overweight, can also be a source of ongoing inflammation. So it's something else that's good to deal with. So what are you going to do for the next 2 weeks prior to your vaccination? You're going to make sure that you're eating the rainbow, having enough protein, getting some regular exercise, hopefully sleeping at least 7 to 8 hours a night, and we're managing those stress levels. Now, some of the things I've suggested will help with managing the stress levels, but I also think with managing stress and the stress that's caused by the events of the last 18 months, you know, if you really need it, there is available now mental health care plan, and you can get 10 sessions with a psychologist through your doctor. So that may also be worth working through to help you with your stress levels. Personally, I prefer to go and have a lovely craniosacral treatment or, you know, a regular massage, but that's what works for me. And the other things that can be really helpful is, you know, like a daily meditation or a yoga session. So have a look around and see what works for you, but just try and get that stress level down for this period. Now, the other thing I wanted to look at was the sort of nutrients you needed to make sure that your immune response is reasonable but not over-revved. Now, I'm actually not going to recommend you take all of this. Some of this I would really prefer you to do as food. So, for example, vitamin A is really important for the immune system, and but typically I prefer people to get it as beta carotene. So, as think orange yellow vegetables, carrots, pumpkin, sweet potato, and I believe it is actually in liver as well, but I can never find a way to get people to eat liver, so we'll kind of ignore that one for the minute. The reason I don't tend to recommend vitamin A as supplements is because the dosage can be quite tricky to manage. And, you know, for pregnant women, you don't want to go over a certain level. So you don't want to go over about 5,000 IUs a day. That's the measurement for vitamin A. So typically with vitamin A, you just want to be a bit careful about dosing. If you're dosing, if it's combined in a supplement, like there's one called ACE that I think Blackmores do. So it's A, C, and E in a supplement, it's probably fine because those dosages will be reasonable. But if you are taking a few supplements with vitamin A, I would just recommend that you look at its the dosage overall and make sure you're not exceeding that 5,000 IU. Now, the ones that probably are most critical for the immune system at this point is vitamin D. And vitamin D, particularly in winter, our levels tend to fall. So according to blood tests, a good level for vitamin D, or a sufficient level, is 50 nanomoles per litre, but it's shown as 50 on your test. So typically I actually want that up around 100. So I find that's kind of it's not deficient range, but it's not sufficient. And for most people, I think Slip, Slop and Slap's done a great job of getting our vitamin D levels, we've all been really concerned about wearing sunblock and protecting ourselves from the sun, but we're also protecting ourselves from a really good source of vitamin D. So most of the time, I'm going to recommend that people would actually look at supplementing this, and particularly pre and post vaccination. So I'm going to suggest 1,000 IU a day, which is usually just, and I've just got a bottle here, but ignore the practitioner label, but these are just little capsules. So they're tiny little capsules, and you can just take one a day. Now, if you have any other situation where if you have an autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's or psoriasis or something like that, your vitamin D levels are probably quite low anyway. So I would typically tend to suggest more in that case, but I'd probably only go up to about 2,000 IU a day without testing. And I'm only going to do this for 2 weeks pre and post. If you do have one of those autoimmune conditions, what I would suggest you do is actually get your blood levels checked and see where you sit, and try and get that up to about 100. And just to give you an idea about what dosing you would need to get those levels up, typically to get your level up by 25 points takes 1,000 IU a day for 3 months. So if you're trying to get it up by 50 points, you'd need 2,000 a day for 3 months. Now, some people would try and do it faster or take higher doses, and that's fine as long as you're monitoring the effect. But vitamin D is really good at modulating the immune system response. So it doesn't over-respond, doesn't under-respond. So what we want the immune system to do is respond appropriately. And I have to say, last year I had a lot of people on vitamin D kind of prophylactically, because there are some really good studies on vitamin D, there are a number of small studies on vitamin D, and that people are more prone to COVID with low vitamin D levels. So I was using it prophylactically with a number of people, but what was really interesting was a lot of people noticed an improvement in their skin when they were prone to skin conditions like dry and chilblains. And I found out subsequently that low vitamin D does give you chilblains. And also that, they said, I'm just not getting the number of colds and flus. Now, part of that clearly last year was with people distancing, masking, etc. There were less of those things being spread. But most people I had on the vitamin D really noticed the impact on their immune system. So that's a really invaluable nutrient. And personally, I was going to say, if you don't do anything else, just do that. Now, the other thing is zinc. And zinc is really important for a really broad range of function. Like I could probably just talk about zinc for 45 minutes in terms of what it does and how useful it is, particularly in terms of our digestion. It's really important for the enzyme, for breaking down food, the enzymes that help you break down food, for protecting the gut lining. And 70% of the immune system is in the gut. So actually you really want to support the gut through this. So having adequate zinc is really important. What is adequate zinc? Well, if you notice that your food doesn't taste particularly good, or you can't taste it, or you're using a lot of salt, chances are you're deficient in zinc. If you notice that you get every cough and cold that's going, you're possibly deficient in zinc. Now, there is the old test about the nails. So have a look at your nails and see if there are any white spots on them. Now, if you've got white spots, that's another possibility. And I don't mean just one white spot, because if you've got one white spot, it's probably because you've bumped it somewhere. And, you've actually it's just a bit of damage to the nail bed. But if you've got a few white spots on your nails, that's another sign of possible zinc deficiency. Again, I wouldn't want to do long-term supplementation without testing, but what I would say is through this period, probably 25 milligrams of zinc is about what I'd be aiming for. Now, if you're taking a multivitamin or something, they'll probably have around 5 to 10 milligrams. So I find that's quite a good dose. I prefer something like what it'll say is zinc oxide or zinc chelate. I prefer the amino acid chelates as a form of zinc for the immune system. I just found it's taken up better and it's more useful. So it's probably, if I was going to supplement two things, it'd be the D and zinc. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was prebiotics and probiotics. So prebiotics are actually a really good way of feeding the gut microbiome. Remember, I said 70% of your immune system is in your stomach. So in terms of the prebiotics, there's two options. One is 3 cups of vegetables a day, plus a serve of nuts and seeds, preferably almond, because for some reason, all the research I've read says almond, the almond brown coating is a really good source of fiber for the microbiome. So if you can include those things for a couple of weeks beforehand, and I would say if your gut functions well and you don't have any bloating, reflux or flatulence, then that's probably adequate in terms of a prebiotic. If you don't, I look at there's a couple on the market that I like, but the best one for feeding a diverse microbiome, and a lot of the research is saying is what we need is, a whole different range of bacteria in our guts. So is guar gum. And it's called partially hydrolyzed guar gum, which is why I think it's marketed as PHGG, because no one can say those other words. But basically, you're looking at what I tend to do with this is, because it does tend to feed the microbiome, you've got to be careful to kind of ramp up the doses gradually, and you probably don't have enough time to do that if you're going to get vaccinated in the next couple of weeks. But I usually start people with a pinch of this twice a day, and then I build up to a teaspoon in water. Now, most of these prebiotic fibers don't really taste of anything. So it's easy enough to add them to other things. Mix them into yogurt's quite a good thing to do. You just get a bit more bang for your buck. Now, if I didn't have access to the prebiotics, and I would look at a broad spectrum probiotic to be taken 2 weeks pre and pro. So I'm looking for something with at least 20 million colony forming units, called CFUs, and probably a you're looking for something with a bifidobacteria, a lactobacillus, and perhaps a couple of other strains in there. And I would just talk to your pharmacist or your health food store about what's a good broad spectrum probiotic. Now, I tend to look at the over-the-counter ones. I prefer the Ethical Nutrients or the Bioceuticals. They're both Australian companies. They make them locally. I know they're good quality. So, they'd be the ones I'd be looking at in preference. So my preference is the prebiotic because I think that beneficially feeds all the beneficial bacteria. The probiotic is probably a good backup if you can't get hold of a prebiotic and if your diet doesn't normally involve a wide range of fruits and vegetables. So the protocol 2 weeks pre and post is D and zinc and the prebiotic ideally, and then eating 3 cups of vegetables a day. And, if I'm thinking about vitamin A containing foods, I'm saying have a cup of pumpkin soup every day. That's getting the vitamin A in the best way you can. Now, the other thing I was just going to check was whether anyone had any questions about that. And I might just get you to pop that in the chat box for me, or just on the nutrients, because I also wanted to mention a couple of things about managing side effects after treatment. Okay, so Connie's asked about no emphasis on vitamin C. Look, at this stage, some people's reaction to, if you're going to use vitamin C, if you use it as high dose, it's a bit pro-oxidative. And so it just has this effect of, it may rev up the immune system a bit too much when you're going through this process. So fruits and vegetables as a source, fine, but I probably wouldn't add a high dose vitamin C at this stage. Where I would use a high dose vitamin C is after the vaccination. If I'm getting lots of side effects, I might, if I'm getting really tired and fluey and headachy, I'm then looking more at a detox. And that's when I'll be looking at the vitamin C in a high dose. Hold on, I've got a couple of other questions here. Do I recommend taking K2 when taking vitamin D? Good question. In fact, 2 of you picked me up on that. Look, it is nice to have the K2 as well, although that's probably more critical for bone health. So for this purpose, I think a D3 is probably adequate. And when you're looking for vitamin D, you want a D3, and that's the preferable form to use. There is some research that the K2 actually really does help with the bone density. So I would be looking at more for bone health generally. So if you're going to buy one for both, you may as well have one with K2 in as well. Okay. And Christine's asked about NAC. Again, there's some concern about stimulating glutathione too much in the early stages with vaccinations. So I've been looking at other ways of, supporting detoxification through that process. So again, what I'm looking for is immune modulation. The NAC can be a really potent detox. So N-acetylcysteine supports the glutathione pathway, which is a really effective detox pathway. So if I had signs and symptoms probably a week or 2 after the vaccine, that's when I'd be looking at using something like NAC, but not through that process. Now, the other thing that I do recommend through the process is looking at, there's a couple of nice homeopathics to look at, and I am getting some in stock. For those of you who haven't used homeopathics before, they're very dilute substances, but basically the really quick and dirty explanation is if your immune system's kind of swung out like this and is overreacting, homeopathics will help you bring you back to a state of balance. So one of the things I am recommending post-vaccine, and it's more for the side effects, because what I'm seeing consistently is people are responding to, they're getting headaches, they're tired, and they're really tired. I would say dull, droopy, and a bit dizzy. So what I've been recommending for people is a homeopathic called Gelsemium, and I'm going to put the name of it in the chat box because what I find is with a lot of homeopathics, the spelling's a bit odd. So gelsemium in either a 30C or a 200C, so that's the potency. You probably find that a lot of health food stores will stock some of the basic homeopathics anyway. So what I'm recommending people do is they take 3 doses of it on the day of the vaccination. So if you have the vaccine, take it, every hour or so after the vaccination to help mitigate the side effects. And then if you do wake up the next morning a bit headachy and fluey, keep going, but 3 times a day. So for a couple of days post-vaccination. There are also some homeopathic remedies that you can use to minimize the side effects. So if the side effects are lasting longer, but I'm just waiting on someone to deliver. There's one question about how many drops. So Julie, 5 drops or 2 pills is my usual dosing with homeopathics, because some people do them in liquids and some people have them in pillules. So there are, if you do find that your effects are more long lasting, ring me up and have a chat, or have a chat to the team at Harvard Homeopathic Clinic, because I believe they've already put a kit together, and you can talk to them about homeopathic options in terms of minimizing side effects if they're longer term. The other thing longer term I am using is I am looking at some detox options. So that could be the high dose vitamin C. It could be something like, I've also been looking at what they call zeolites, which is actually something that goes through the digestive tract and binds to some of the ingredients that were in the vaccine. So what you want with the vaccine is you want adjuvants in there which irritate the immune system and cause a response. But once they've done their job, you want to mop them up, because you probably don't want them in your system longer term. So some of the things I've been looking for to help support that are things like, the one I'm using is called Toxaprevent, and you can get that from a practitioner. But I'm giving most of my clients a couple of sachets to do. The only thing with using something like that is you probably need to make sure you're having enough fluid at the same time, because it can be a bit constipating otherwise. And when you're trying to detox effectively, it's really important to be having enough water. Now, if anyone's got any other questions, do you want to just turn your mic back on and you can ask directly? I'm just going to pause the recording now and thank you for participating, but